Good morning, everyone. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. It is about 9:48 on a Sunday. Pretty overcast day. Weather has been pretty awesome the last week. Um, Today looks like it's going to be gray. I'm hoping it's not going to rain, but you know, I don't know. It's been kind of this cool second summer, I guess, to a degree lately. So it's been pretty hot and been pretty sunny, so that's been cool. So hope everyone's doing good. The summer is just about, well, technically going to be coming to an end here pretty soon. So it's kind of crazy that how fast things go. You know, we're into a into the school year now, into probably going into the third week of school already, which is crazy. So, but again, there's still some cool things happening. Have a couple of quantum shows coming up. I'm going to be doing some press for that really soon. So, look out for that and those kinds of things. So, yesterday I went to the Waldo Theater. I went with a couple of friends, and I've done a handful of reviews of different movies that I've seen there this year and then also last year. And the Waldo Theater, I think, is a local treasure for this community here on the Mid Coast. Not only do they do, they have lots of music events and different things. I got to, I was fortunate enough early in the beginning of the summer to play a show there and to be involved with like this big, kind of thing with a handful of bands. And it was super fun. It was a blast. It felt like everything was pretty successful for the most part. So, maybe something will come out of it. And I know since then they've done a lot of music. They've had a lot of national acts. They've had, the fabulous, iconic director John Waters was there in June. I saw Victor Wooten, the bass player virtuoso. Some of the shows have been completely sold out. Henry Rollins is going to be there, I believe, this coming weekend on Saturday. Patty Griffin is playing. I think it might have happened already. But they also do an amazing movie series. They show regular films there. They do these specialty shows. They'll show like holiday movies, Christmas movies and things like that, and kids movies, and then they'll show like just classic, movies like movies that star like Humphrey Bogart, things like that. But there's a certain thing, little group there that is called the Waldo After Dark, which is my favorite, and they specialize in showing lots of B movies, exploitation movies, movies from the late '70s to the '80s, and it's been awesome. I've gone there a handful of times to see some really great movies. I saw one of the last movies I saw was Maniac Cop there. I've seen a bunch of great movies there. And, as I've said many times in the past, the exploitation world, the sci fi horror exploitation world is my jam. That's my favorite style of filmmaking. But again, I always check out other new things, try to stay up on newer movies. And I love, big budget movies also, big budget Hollywood movies. But, we always have our thing that we come back to. And for me, it's always the low budget exploitation world that is always great. And while I love that style to death, like, again, I love many different things. I'm also a huge fan of anime. I, I, got into anime probably in college. Yeah, around college. Like I had known about it as a kid. It was mostly through like American anime that was obviously inspired by Japanese anime. You know, grew up, as a child in the 80s, so, I used to watch Voltron, the animated series, GoBots, the Transformers, various things like that. And those were, they're classic shows, and they're great and they're wonderful. But those were basically, to a degree, like rip-offs or, knockoffs of Japanese anime. But still, that being said, classic anime. And it wasn't until college where got I got turned on to anime and I started watching anime, and then I became a huge fan of anime. Some of my favorites are, obviously the Ghost in the Shell, the original. I love the. There was a really amazing series that came out in I think it's the late 80s, 90s, called Berserker, which was a Japanese fantasy samurai series. Really brutal and just, amazing. Vampire Hunter D is another one. Most of these are like the old school ones. Appleseed is another one that I just always love that one to death. And then today's show is about Akira. And then Metropolis, which was a remake of the Fitz Lang movie, but it was adapted in an anime style, which is really amazing. Spirited Away, which is a relatively newer anime. So, so many great animes. But you know, for a while, I didn't stay up on a lot of the newer anime for quite a few years. And then probably the last 2 or 3 years, I, because anime, obviously at that time when I was a kid, was it was very huge in Japan and Asia, and it had a market in the U.S. at the time, but it's commercially it wasn't where it is now. Like commercially, it's been completely embraced by whole generations of kids and just the Western public in general. And anime is very distinct, very unique, very different from as opposed to Western animation or to a degree cartoon cinema, if you want to call it that. I mean, with American animation, you have, well, more recently, and it's something that's huge here, and there's wonderful movies within that canon, but the Pixar movies, those typically deal with like, family friendly themes, but they also have some weight and some levity. Really pretty good animation, but they're very much garnered to like movies that have a mass appeal for everyone. But they do have lots of different things that can interest different ages. I grew up on like watching Tom and Jerry also, and Mighty Mouse and the GI Joe series, and they're great. Thundercats. But the thing that's so different about anime is that the one of the biggest factors, especially with the old school ones, like some of the titles I ran off, is the brutality and the violence. They are very very violent, very very dark. They typically deal with very heavy issues around death and mortality, uh, surviving or pulling through, or dealing with incredibly traumatic situations. They typically have elements. A lot of the anime stuff is really steeped in the the world of science fiction and horror. Uh, and if they were made here in the U.S. at that time, they would obviously get an R rating. But they typically deal with very heavy themes, and the violence, the sexual content is is brutal as all hell for the most part, and they don't pull any punches. And it's an interesting thing because of culturally, kids are raised on a lot of these films, so their exposure and I think the exposure to these films and with these heavy themes, I think really has impacted the culture for in a positive way, especially Japanese culture, because they're introducing essentially like adult themes, but to kids at a younger age, and I feel that that can really help and step up with your growth and development as a child or as an adolescent. Whereas anime here or animation in America, they typically deal with more common, basic, family friendly themes to a degree. Some of the biggest studios in Japan: Madhouse, Studio Bones, Kyoto Animation, Toei Animation, and Magna, which is of course probably the biggest company that put out all kinds of animation from the starting in the late 70s, 80s, and into the 90s, and even now with the total embracing by the world of anime. It's amazing the amount of animation that comes out. So like for quite a few years I did not stay up on a lot of the newer ones, and then the last 2 years I was checking out a lot of anime movies, and the artwork, the production value on a lot of these newer films is just beautiful and gorgeous and staggering. But one thing I noticed was it felt like there was a shift. And I know films like the classics, like I mentioned in the top of the show, on the top of the show, that and I know films that deal with those darker themes and deal with the more adult oriented kinds of things, and with the extreme violence and the brutality. But most of the newer anime that I've seen, it seems like it's kind of gone in the way of more, you know, um, to a degree, like family friendly themes. There's still lots of really great, like an inclusion of science fiction elements, and maybe to a degree certain horror elements, but mostly like fantasy based themes I have kind of come across in a lot of the newer anime, and also hints, whether it's like subtle or overt science fiction themes. But it seems like generally a lot of the newer films are, I don't know, a little bit more commercial to a degree, or they're a little bit more watered down. They don't go to those darker depths like the earlier ones. And I have seen quite a few, and they're really great in a lot of ways. And the animation, like I said, is unbelievable. And obviously, there, from a technological standpoint, there has been massive you know advances in from that perspective, or in that perspective. But I just feel like the themes are just not, they don't have the levity that they had during the classic decades of anime. I don't know. It's one thing I noticed, and again, there's certain newer ones that I have seen that I really like, but I felt they're tonally, thematically, there's a big difference. And again, I am a huge film fanatic, and I collect lots of movies. And unfortunately, I don't have a lot of anime that I own. There are a few that I do own. I have the Berserker series, but I have that on DVD. I have, I do have Ghost in the Shell on Blu-ray. I Vampire Hunter D I have on DVD. I have, a handful of films. but there's so many great ones. One I forgot to mention is Ninja Scroll. There's so many I'd like to get, and in particular, the one I've always been wanting to get is Akira, which is today's show, the topic of today's show. And I one thing I notice is for the older, it's probably kind of the same thing for newer ones, but I think for the older ones, the prices are still incredibly high for a lot of those classics on Blu-ray. I remember seeing a few years ago, checking out Akira, and it was like a collector's edition on Blu-ray 4K. It was a couple of years ago, and I remember coming across it in my travels, and it was like close to like 40 or $50. It was insane. And one thing I noticed is I haven't done it in a while, so probably prices have dropped. But one thing I did notice when I was proactively looking for anime to buy on Blu-ray was the prices were just insane, and they compared to other genres and other kinds of films, the prices didn't seem to be dropping at all. So that's one of the reasons I don't own any of those films, or don't own certain films that I really need to get and I really love, and eventually I will buy them, at some point. Like for instance, I got Ghost in the Shell. I think it was last year or the year before. I got that on Blu-ray, a really great edition, and that was really cheap. I remember getting it for like, I think less than $10. And at one point when I did see that year, quite a few years ago, it was starting price was like $30. So it will change eventually with the market and stuff. But anyway, so yesterday I went with some friends, and they had the one of the amazing things about the Waldo After Dark is there's a lot of they show so many great films in their series. A lot of Most of the films that they have shown, and most of the films that I have gone to are movies in the kind of in the exploitation world. A lot of movies from the late '70s, a lot of movies from the '80s, just fabulous. And there's been a handful of movies that I've seen there that I own and that I really really love. And the thing that's so awesome is to see some of these classics on the big screen. For me, is just amazing because the Waldo Theater is an amazing facility. They got a really great surround sound system, beautiful screen. It's just tremendous. And so I came across it the other day, or actually last week, that another movie that they were showing was going to be the original Akira, and I love that movie to death, and I've seen it so many times. So I went with some friends last night to see it, and I was completely blown away by this movie. I It's been probably maybe a couple of years, maybe a little bit less since I've seen it. I always watch it every few years. I always usually rent it. And again, it was one of those experiences where, as many times as I have seen Akira, it felt like I was watching it for the first time because of just the immersion of being in a really beautiful theater. There were a lot of people there last night too, which is really cool. I figured Akira is a tremendously huge, a tremendously popular movie in the world of anime. Most people know of that movie, even if they haven't taken the time to say explore the anime world, because that world is just massive. I mean, there's so many genres, there's so many subgenres. Um, but most people look at that film and know of it, even if they don't like anime. Most people have heard of Akira, and it's probably the biggest film in the genre, in the entire genre. And it's interesting because it's funny in their ads at the Waldo Theater. They're going to be showing a couple of Dario Gento movies, who is one of the greatest horror directors ever from Italy. and they're going to be showing Suspiria on the big screen, which I'm just like, absolutely. And they're going to show one or two of his other movies too. And I feel like there's an interesting thing because I feel like the same thing is for Suspiria. There's, you know, when you talk about the world of Italian horror exploitation, it's massive. It's massive. It's a huge world. There's so many amazing directors, so many amazing films. But Dario Argento and that movie, especially Suspiria, those films are so well known. And I would say that that film and Suspiria and as well as Dario Argento are probably the most popular. Uh, he's definitely the most popular director, I would say, in the world of Italian horror. And Suspiria is definitely the most, I would say, overall the most well known and the most popular Italian horror film. And it's kind of similar to how I brought up Akira, where lots of people who might not have ever taken that deep dive and explored that genre all know of that movie. They could be just, it could be, a person who is into just straight up American horror films, slasher films, but they've never taken the deep dive into European cinema. But 99% of the time, I would say they know or they've seen Suspiria and know who Dario Argento is. Definitely the biggest name. So I think Akira is similar in that manner. It's kind of got that um, level of charisma around it as a film. And again, it's been a couple of years since I saw this film, since I saw Akira, but I have to say it was like watching it for the first time. It was great seeing it in a really pretty crowded theater. The picture was amazing. The screen was amazing. The sound was just staggering. They were When we got there, they were doing a raffle, and basically one of the prizes they were giving away a couple of like a handful of prizes, some really nice poster artwork from Akira. They had the graphic novel of Akira, and then they also had the vinyl soundtrack of Akira, which looked amazing. And if I was like, it made me realize like I need to get a record player. I need to get something like that to start buying some vinyl. I used to be a pretty big vinyl collector at one point, but I haven't in years. My turntables and my system are in total disarray, but I want to get a good record player with some good speakers. That would be pretty sweet, but pretty amazing. And so, again, I was just completely blown away by this film and how just utterly timeless this movie is and how influential this movie is. It came out in 1988, and the basic story is the Japanese government drops an atomic bomb on Tokyo after ESP experiments on children go awry. In 2019, 31 years after the nuking of the city, Kaneda, a bike gang leader, tries to save his friend Tetsu from a secret government project. He battles anti-government activists, greedy politicians, irresponsible scientists, and powerful military leaders until Tetsu's supernatural powers suddenly manifest. A final battle is fought in Tokyo's Olympiad, exposing the experiment's secrets. And as many times as I've seen this movie, I remember turning to my friend Aaron and saying, "Wow, I forgot how dark this movie is and just how violent it is. Like it's brutal. It's brutal as all hell." And the action for this film is just so amazing. And the movie is pretty long. Like it clocks in to 2.5 hours. It's pretty long, but it's the the nature of the film. There's so much amazing action that it's just gripping. And to believe and to think that this movie came out in 1988, the animation just looks completely spectacular, completely timeless. And this film was such a huge, culturally just had such an impact. it went on to influence so many science fiction movies. I would say the Wachowski brothers. I remember seeing lots of interviews with them over the years. Of course, the creators of the Matrix films. How they were so influenced by Akira as being they always talked about their two primary movies as far as in the anime world that were inspirations were Ghost in the Shell and Akira. And watching Akira, like you can really see on how, with the whole cyberpunk element, just amazing how ahead of its time this film was. Um, it was directed by Katsuri Atomo. Um, and Katsuri Atomo was obviously a very, prolific, iconic director. He was originally a Japanese manga artist and screenwriter and animator and film director. He's best known because he's the creator of Akira. And he also came out with the original series, the Magna series, and the 88, the film adaptation. He wrote and directed that. He spent most of his years and subsequent years as kind of behind the scenes as a writer on various anime books and acting as a producer. Um, Neo Tokyo is one other film that he also was involved with and directed. Robot Carnival, which was an animated film adaptation. He produced numerous films. Mushishi, based on Yushi Sharaba's Magna of the same time. Um, Short Piece, another film he was involved in. Um, but most well known, he's obviously most well known as the creator of um, Akira. Domi, A Children's Dream, which was a series he did, a Magna series. Fireball, and which was another uh, book series he put out. But astounding. The music, the sound in the studio at the Waldo Theater was just amazing. I mean, it was you could hear a pin drop, and it was completely immersive. I was just blown away by how what an engaging film it was, and like I said, it was like watching it for the first time. And again, it deals with so many different issues. It deals with you know even as some of the incredibly horrible social political things that we've experienced during the pandemic, and then also the where we're at kind of as a culture. I mean, just timeless. Timeless. There are scenes in this movie where it made me really think of some of the things we were witnessing during the protests that were happening, and then which led to some of the riots. Just really ahead of its time, and this incredible distrust of the government, and yeah, and the themes that this film deals with too are just amazing. Uh, you know, so much levity and so much. Uh, it deals with trauma, and it deals with questioning the government's motivations. I mean, the science fiction element is just incredible. The action is just astounding. And it was great. It was wonderful, and it was. I have not seen too much anime in the theater before, and that was definitely the best. And I think overall, Akira, it's easily, and I think it's totally safe to say that Akira is probably the greatest anime movie ever. I mean, it's got everything, and it is so timeless. It's got balls to it, and it's just a timeless classic. So one of these days I will buy it on Blu-ray. I've never seen it on Blu-ray. I've seen it on DVD. I've seen many different editions of it. So, but and I highly highly recommend if you're in the area of Waldoboro, please go and check out any of the films that the wonderful organization, Waldo After Dark, is doing. They have a really great Facebook presence, so it's really easy to see what they're doing, plans that they have for in the future, and they put on a lot of great shows. Lots of great movies are coming down the pike, so just fabulous. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.